My name's Frank Jester. I'm the great-grandson of Captain Albert Jester that started the ferry when it was from Scotland to Jamestown. This is a picture of, this presentation was pretty much put together by a gentleman named Bill Fox, who's a retired naval architect in the area. And in the late 1990s, he, getting ready for the 75th anniversary of the ferry, he put together a 13-page article for this magazine. And his interest in the ferry was in part because he had always lived here, didn't know anything about it, but his mother was from Surry. So he started getting into it. In 1925, the Jamestown Ferry Corporation was created by my great-grandfather, Captain Albert Jester. This is in 1925. This is the summer. The ferry started in February. But we know this is in the summer, and it's his birthday, because you can see his 50th birthday cake in his hand there to your right. He's wearing his white two-piece summer uniform. In the winter, he wore a three-piece navy blue uniform. This is one of the first boats he had. He came from Chincoteague and came down here in about 1917 from Chincoteague. But up in Chincoteague, he had to make a living, and he had this boat, which was named for his daughter, Anita, and he ran the mail and passenger service from Chincoteague to the bustling metropolis of Greenbackville in Virginia. It's kind of northwest of Chincoteague. It's right on the Maryland line. And so he ran that, had the mail service for that, lost the contract, got the contract to run the mail service down here from Smithfield to Battery Park to Newport News. So he loaded everybody up on the boat, and they came here, and they moved into a house just up the street at 338 Main Street in Smithfield in 1917. Not only did he run the ferry and shuttle service in the mail from Smithfield to Battery Park to Newport News, he would also let people charter the boat. And he chartered it in 1922 to some folks to go to Jamestown. You'll see Jamestown down here in the bottom left in 1922 for the unveiling of a Pocahontas memorial at Jamestown. So he brought everybody up. He was sitting on the side of on the Jamestown Island looking across at Surry and thought, well, there's nowhere for cars to get across the river from Richmond all the way to Norfolk. So maybe this would be a good spot. It's kind of narrow, it's not bad. Maybe we can do that. Well, the reason I show you this is this map is from 1818. Yeah. You'll see a ferry line for a ferry right along here, and then to the right going over to Hog Island. Well, it's still called Hog Island, but in those days, that's where all the livestock lived. And that's what they ran the ferry downriver to take the hogs and livestock to keep them downstream from Jamestown to help keep them a little healthier. But the ferries, they have records of ferries running as early as 1660 out of Jamestown. Of course, they didn't have any cars till 1925, but.
And those ferries would have been like oar-powered, right?
Probably,
yeah.
Probably. Or as this gentleman back here mentioned in the movie, what was it? Outlaw Josie Wales, they had a big rope and you'd pull across. Yeah. So 1922, Captain Jester figures out that, well, maybe we'll put a ferry across. And he went to Mr. Hundley in Battery Park and said, I want a car ferry that'll carry 16 Model Ts and 100 passengers. So he did that in 1924. Hundley delivered it to him in 25. This is actually in Battery Park. When they finished the boat here, they towed it to Norfolk and put a little 60 horsepower diesel engine in it so it could get back and forth across the river. Now, this is the finished product. You'll note at this end, there's a rudder and a propeller. There's a rudder and propeller at the other end. It's what they call a double ender. Just like the ferries today, they don't turn around. They just go in one direction or the other. There's a pilot house at each end. Captain just walks from one end to the other. It works really, really well that way. Here's a point at the top middle, you see the big black smokestack going up with the J on the side of it for Jester. Well, that's just a big fake. You see the little teeny cap at the top? It's on the exhaust pipe for the diesel engine. It didn't need that great big smokestack, but it'd be a little teeny J on it if you didn't use that. All right, this is actually sorry you can't read it, it's a newspaper article from 1925, right after the opening of the ferry. They had 10 o'clock in the morning on the 26th, they took the ferry from Scotland or Surry over to Jamestown. There was a brass band there from Norge. There were dignitaries from Williamsburg and Newport News. The ferry went over, picked them up with a whole bunch of cars. They weren't old cars then, they were just cars. And they came back over to Surry, went to the Surry house, had a nice little dinner and celebrated everything. Captain Jester took them back over to Jamestown, and I don't know that he took the rest of the day off, but then ferry service started the next morning at 6:45 in the morning till 11 o'clock at night, 7 days a week. That's a whole lot of work. Now, you've got to have a big picture in your head to commit to running a business upwards of 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. You obviously can't do that by yourself. He had plenty of help. This is just an early picture of the Captain John Smith with some of the cars on there. Like I said, it was built for 16 cars, and I think because the cars changed in size and that kind of thing, they got down to about 12 is all they could handle. Now, you could also charter the ferry for $25. It'd take you out on a boat ride on the river, and they'd put a piano down there in where the cars were and take you out to have your party. There were stories of, we haven't seen pictures yet, of William and Mary students or organizations chartering the boat, putting a band down there, and the kids going out and dancing and having a big time. This would be in the late 1920s, the roaring 20s.
It's just like a cruise ship today.
Exactly, exactly. Speaking of that, nobody's going to deny or say it did happen, but there may have been gambling going on in the passenger section on the upper deck. This is just cars loading up on the John Smith. Now, early on, they were trying to get people to ride the ferry. This is when it was first coming out. You see the schedule is 7 in the morning till 11 at night, Monday through Saturday, till midnight on Sunday. But he's also running down here, the passenger boat Anita, still running from Smithfield, Battery Park, and Newport News. Because this is in 25 when the ferry starts. James River Bridge didn't come into 28 till 28. So let's still run it. So they did. They kept running that. And they would let you charter that also because it's done running at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, you may note down here, about here, it says meals are served on board. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute too. That's the original terminal on the Jamestown side, built in 1925. It was built on Jamestown Island for the ferry to dock. That's probably the Captain John Smith there. But the ferry terminal was put in, like I said, in 1925. The ferry system was sold to VDOT, or Virginia Department of Highways at the time, sold to VDOT in 45. Well, in 57, they were coming up on the 350-year anniversary of Jamestown being founded. So they wanted to move the cars off of Jamestown Island so it could be more of a historical place. So in 57, VDOT built the new terminal and all of that. That's where it is today. Now the gentleman on the right is Captain Albert Jester that started all of this. The gentleman on the left is a gentleman who was one of his first captains on the boat to help with it. And the gentleman on the left ended up being his son-in-law because he married Anita. Well, this is Sam Wallace Edwards, who was raised in Smithfield, knew about smoking hams, and started curing hams. Captain Jester let him sell ham biscuits on the boat, i.e. meals on the boat. Now, he did that in 25. When they started, in 1933, Wallace Edwards had been so busy, he wanted to focus more on the ham business. So in 33, he left the ferry and just went into the ham business full time. Now, Captain Jester didn't want to miss out on the ham biscuits, the good country ham biscuits, that most of you have had that before. So he figured people would be thirsty. So Captain Jester had free water. Now, if you need a cup, that's a penny, but the water's free. Now, Wallace built smokehouses there in Surry. They look kind of like Indian houses, a wigwam. At one point in time, they called them wigwam hams. Now, a couple of these smokehouses you can still see in Surry. They're still there. Now, this gentleman is Mr. Buck Younglove. I don't know if it's Young Love or Young Glove. I don't know which way he pronounced it. His name's Buck. He was there he worked on the ferry for about 40 years, starting in 1930-ish. He died in 07, 98 years old. His son still works for the ferry, and his son's been with the ferry 30 plus years. Now, this, you see, that's the inside of the pilot house. That's the only picture anybody can find of the inside of the ferry. Everything else is just from the water and from the outside. But that's the deck house inside the pilot house. Now, that's just a newspaper clipping they were changing the hours from winter hours to summer hours. Summer hours ran from April 15th to October the 15th, I think it was. And it tells you how much it costs to cross. This is on the Jamestown Ferry and also the Claremont Ferry. The Claremont Ferry did not have cars. That was still the Oneida and that kind of thing. But to run a car across it, it was approximately $1 to go one way. That included a driver. If you had a passenger, that was another 30 cents or something like that. If you got a round trip ticket, it was like $1.50. If you were walking, that was $0.25. But they'd get you across there. Now, a gentleman named Will Minot, wrote a book that Bill Fox got a hold of and got to know Mr. Minot, and Minot introduced him to Rodney Taylor, who wrote this book about Jamestown. Now, Rodney Taylor grew up on Jamestown Island. His father was a superintendent for everything historical on Jamestown Island. And Rodney Taylor, when he was a kid, worked as a deckhand on the Captain John Smith. And he remembered one of his jobs was changing, you got a rudder at each end. Well, when you get ready to pull out the front rudder, you can't have it moving, so they drop a rudder pin in it. His job was to move it to the other end at each end. That was one of his jobs. But he remembered that, and he was a big help to Mr. Fox about putting all this information together. Now, the Captain John Smith was a pretty boat. You've seen some pictures. After it was owned by VDOT for a while, they saw a reason to take the deck house off the top of it and put a more slender deck house in the middle there. Well, they took the old deck house off and sold it to the Beasley family in Portsmouth. And the Beasleys put it up on pilings in the middle of the western branch of the Elizabeth River as a summer home or a place to go fishing. You've seen it, if you've been down 17, you've seen a couple houses out there. That's what this was. Exactly when it was, couldn't tell you. But it had to be in the 50s. When it reached its useful life, they sold it to, let me see if I get his name right, Master X out of Richmond. Now, his real name was Jesse Boland, and he was somebody who was a purveyor of voodoo and hexes and spells and such. But apparently he was pretty entrepreneurial. He bought the Captain John Smith to try to run excursions and that kind of thing up in Richmond. He was also a noted aviator. When he died, well, I'll go back. He didn't work out so well on the excursions on the Captain John Smith, but so he ended up scuttling it, but we'll look at that. But he had, when he died in '62, he owned 13 airplanes, had a 180-acre farm outside of Richmond with an airport on it, and he owned 2 B-17 bombers. But he could fly them all, apparently. But he was apparently quite the character. Now, Captain John Smith got scuttled. Roland didn't have another use for it, and he sold it to a guy named Bill Poole. Now, Bill Poole wanted to use it as a marina, some kind of floating marina. Long story short, that didn't end up working out. But he was a big wealth of information to Bill Fox that put all this together. And he provided a lot of information and some hardware like the portholes and that kind of thing from the Captain John Smith that are in the Surry Historical Society. Sorry for the other advertising. But he was a big help for that. But since then, it's been even more scuttled and nobody really knows exactly where it is. This is one of the ferries that came after VDOT when my grandfather was no longer involved, because he sold out in '45. Just a point, when he started it and he was running the ferry 18 hours a day, well, when World War II came along, they ran 24 hours a day. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it's my understanding they missed one day or something in 20-some years due to weather. It was just like iced up in some way that I can't imagine that you could ice up the James River. But this is a Mary Bell. It was one of the ferries that came along. It was about 100 feet long. This one is a Chesapeake, and it was, let's see, now she had the diesel electric kind of motors in it. Some of y'all may have seen some of these. This is the city of Hampton. Sorry, I don't have a better picture of it. This one you may or may not remember. This one has a pretty interesting story, I think. This is the Ocean City. Now, it was built in Delaware in '23. Came down here, it was steam powered. It ran for a long time across the James, the 4 miles or something across the James. When they thought it was pretty much done and they were looking to replace it, they sold it to a man. It got in this kind of shape, and they sold it to a guy named Tom Palmer. Tom Palmer said, hey, that's a nice sized boat. I think I can rent spots on it to people to bring their RV camper and put 3 or 4 campers, 6 campers on it, let people live in their camper, and I'll move them from this location to here and let them go on a little trip and do day excursions and all that stuff, and they'll be out for a week or something like that. But he was going to use this. Well, the kicker was he was going to use it in Puget Sound in Washington State. So he pulled it out of Jamestown, went down the James River, went down, went through the Panama Canal, went back up to Puget Sound, and did those excursions for a couple years. And it's been scuttled since then. It's last known in Tacoma, Washington. But that's a heck of a trip for a boat that for a long, long time made a 4-mile trip back and forth all day. Now this is just another boat. This is a Miss Washington. It was a little boat. It got blown up on the beach in 29, no, it was built in 29. In 54, it got blown up on the beach. And I think they were able to reuse it a little bit. It's just a picture of another ferry. Now this is a pretty boat, I think. It's named the Virginia. It was 152 feet long. It was built up in Burlington, Vermont. And it did a great job for us at Jamestown. It went back and forth and did everything it was supposed to. A lot of people really like taking pictures of the superstructure and all that. It apparently had some minor difficulties and had to be taken to Norfolk for some repair work. So it came back looking more like that, not quite as pretty. Now, it was sold in 2019 when the new Powhatan ferry came along, and it's being used. It was sold and sent to New Jersey. Now, what it does up there, I don't know, but it's a ferry, so probably dragging people. This is the Scotland side of the river. This was rebuilt. They don't always have 4 ferries there, but it was rebuilt in around 1980. It had a Hurricane Isabel, I think it was, came in 2003. Some of you may remember that. There was a bunch of damage done to the terminal. They got it fixed. No damage to the ferries because they took them all up to Richmond so they wouldn't get affected so bad. But that was in 2003 with Hurricane Isabel. Well, here's another ferry comes along. That's nice. It's the Williamsburg, and it's pretty. There's the Pocahontas. Now, the Pocahontas, let's see if I, sorry, don't have my glasses on. All right, so the Pocahontas came along, and it's one of the more modern ones. It came out in 2019 or so. It's 260 feet long, I think, something like that, but it's 65 feet wide, which means the Captain John Smith was as long as this is wide. So theoretically, you could stack a whole bunch of them all the way down the boat. But this only holds about 70 cars. So it takes a lot of trips across there to carry the almost 900,000 cars that go across that ferry every year. Now this came along in 95. They took the tolls off in 97. So it's been toll-free since then.
They took the what off?
The toll. You don't have to pay to ride anymore. Now, this and I believe it's the Powhatan have a new drive system to them. This called Voith makes it, and it's a propulsor. I don't understand it, but I have no reason to understand it. That's the motor in the middle. The 4 fins going down adjust in some way. There's no rudder to the boat. There's one at each end, and it goes back and forth across the river. And as I understand it, you can reverse one of them and spin it in its own length, pretty much like you could a 0-turn mower or a tank, for those of you that know how to drive a tank. Now, they took the top off the Captain John Smith and sold it to the Beasley family to put in the river. Well, they did. They put it in there, and this is in 2000, so it's been sitting out there in the river for 50 years, give or take. This is a picture from the Virginian pilot, and Virginian pilot referred to it as a chicken coop because to keep people out of it, somebody had gone by and stapled up chicken wire over the doors and windows to try to keep people out of it. Now that was in 2000. About 2002, Bill Fox, the gentleman on the right is Sam Wallace Edwards Jr., and the younger man there is Sam III. So they go out to look at see what kind of shape the house is in, and it was not in very good shape, but it was salvageable. So they went out and looked at it and started the idea of what can we do to save this thing. Fortunately, a gentleman named Scott Wheeler was an entrepreneur from the Williamsburg area, wanted to put in a restaurant kind of place over in Surry, and thought this would be a good centerpiece for it. So he went out and he bought the boat from the city of Portsmouth or from the Beasleys or whoever actually owned it at that time. Now it looks kind of open there because the only way to move it, especially on a truck, is they cut it in half the long way. And you see the boats, they've lifted it up off the pilings, and they put it on trucks, carried it to Surry to put it in Mr. Wheeler's farm. And Mr. Wheeler's farm is what is today the Hampton Roads Winery and Vineyard, or Vineyard and Winery. I don't know if you've been there. It's a nice place, and they do weddings and all that kind of stuff. But he put it out there on his farm. A couple months after they rescued this is when 2003, when Isabel came and tore up the terminal on Scotland that they had to rebuild, but it tore all this up too. Fortunately, the deck house itself was gone. They had taken that off, but it would have been completely destroyed if the storm had come at that time when the boat was still there, and the deck house was still there. Wheeler lost interest in doing the putting up his restaurant and things that he wanted to do, and so he donated the house, the deck house, to the Surry Historical Society. The Surry Historical Society said, well, okay, what are we going to do with it? And they went to the Beasley Foundation, and the story goes, they went to Beasley to see if they could help them get a grant or something for it. And Beasley said, I can't help you get a grant, but here's a check, you know. And Beasley put in the foundation underneath. They took the deck house there and set it up. A year or so later, the Historical Society had applied to the state of Virginia for a transportation enhancement grant and got $160,000 from VDOT to restore it. It was a matching grant, so they had to come up with money and time served and, you know, all the donation things to make up the other half. But, so they did that, they got the grant, they gave the contract to rebuild the deck house to an organization called, a gentleman goes by the name of Black Creek Woodworking, Black Creek Restoration. He's from Cortland, over by Franklin, if you know where that is. He works in Williamsburg, does a lot of restoration work now. But he went to Surry, did all his measurements, did everything. Bill Fox and some CAD drawers redid everything, gave him complete plans of how to rebuild it. He took it apart, took it to his shop, completely built it brand new in his shop in Cortland, took it back apart, they put it on trucks and carried it back up to Surry. And at that time they had put in the new awnings over top of it and that kind of thing. And they dedicated it in 2015, in May of 2015. Now, May of 2025, they're going to have a rededication of it. That's not mine, good. May the 17th I'm going with, and you can go up to Surry to the Historical Society and go all through the deck house and the pilot house and all that. The deck house had a pilot house at each end. It had 2 crew quarters, 2 bathrooms, and a big area for people. It's a nice thing. This is another little shelter. That's after it's a little more finished. There's the look of it from the end. Obviously, it'd take a really short car to go under it now. Now there's the Powhatan that came along in 2019, I think it was. And let's see, this is from a couple weeks ago, the 100th celebration. Those are antique cars from Williamsburg and the South Side classic car folks. And they have got some gorgeous cars. I'm sorry I don't have more pictures of those for you. But they were really, really nice. A whole lot of fun. They put a lot of family members and that kind of thing in the cars and carried us over. That's another shot from above looking down. And unfortunately, I don't have any more pictures from that for you, but there's some things from the Surry Historical at the ceremony that was in the Jamestown, what's it called? The place at Jamestown where they've got all the displays and everything. Anyway, it was in there. And there's a cake from VDOT is pictures of the 4 ferries that they run now. If you don't know, they run ferries 24 hours a day now, and they do it with those 4 ferries. That's pretty much the end of it. I hope I haven't bored anybody. And please ask me some questions. Yes, ma'am.
What is your feeling on the bridge that's being discussed going from there to there to do away with there?
There are all kinds of reasons to have the bridge. Okay? The thing people think about, oh, well, we'll just put a little teeny bridge across it. Well, you can't do that. If you've ever been on the James River and been at the bridge, they got some pretty fair-sized boats that go through there, okay? And they got a bridge just like that up in Hopewell at the Benjamin Harrison Bridge. Well, you got a great big bridge at each end for a reason, because there's great big boats go through there. So you can't have a little teeny bridge in the middle. So now you got to build something as big as the middle part anyway of the James River Bridge. And 1, it's going to be cost prohibitive. 2, it's going to look ugly, but personal opinion. So I doubt they're going to do anything, but my great-grandfather did something that lasted 100 years. Okay, I'm good if they put a bridge in, but there's a lot of reasons not to. Now at the 90th celebration, we were there. We went, and I was fortunate enough, to speak for a moment. And I told jokingly to Mr. Lane, can't think of his first name. He was the head of transportation for the state of Virginia. I said, my great-grandfather built the ferry, bought the ferry for $17,000, $18,000, had it built and bought it for that. Spent $23,000 or so building the terminals and the approach roads and all that. So he had $40,000 tied up in this. And he made a living at it for 20 years, turned it over to VDOT, and they lost money every year since then. So, I don't know that it's going to be, I think they're ahead of the game to lose a little money every year and keep the ferry. Because if you start visualizing putting a huge bridge across there, which you would have to do, I don't see them doing that. I doubt it seriously. But if they do, that's great. There's progress. And, well, part of the reason my great-grandfather put it up there at Surry is because he was losing the mail contract at the James River Bridge from Smithfield to Battery Park to Newport News. They're putting in the bridge. You don't need my boat running a ferry to run the mail. So you just adapt and do something else. So, yes, thank you for asking. Yes, sir.
2 questions.
Sure.
One, you said it ran during the war.
Uh-huh.
Did they ever station people there as lookouts? Because I know there's a lot of buildings over in Newport News and maybe even on this side of where they can use the ropes as lookouts for the enemy. Did they ever have anyone stationed before people doing lookouts?
Not that I'm aware of, but that you mentioned that. I don't remember exactly what the years were for World War I, but when he brought his family from Chincoteague to Smithfield, they're coming down as they enter the Hampton Roads Harbor or into the James River. They were boarded by the Coast Guard. And he said, sure, look around all you want to. Because they were looking to see if they were smuggling things in and they were part of the European, they were part of the bad guys. And they went, the story goes, they opened up the hatch and in the bottom was a piano, some chickens, and I forgot, some peanut poles or something. The guy says, oh, you're good, and let them go. But they got inspected for that.
How many people did he employ? What was the crew? It must have, he didn't all do it by himself, but he had to pay all these people? So
sure.
What was his workforce number?
I don't know, but I would think at a minimum, you've got to have a captain, a second mate, and at least one deckhand. So you got 3 or 4 people on the payroll 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that's a lot of folks.
And you probably gotta have like an engineer for the motor and.
So you've got a good payroll for that.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that one of the little quotes somebody said Captain Jester's favorite thing was to let somebody else drive the boat, and he'd go down and talk to people, and he really liked standing at the end of the ferry collecting the fare for them coming on. He really liked that part. He liked that part. But I don't know how many people he had, but he's running at least one ferry all the time, all right, 18 hours. He's running the Oneida to still run the mail route for the first 2 or 3 years. Rumor has it that as the bridge went in 28, he had started a bus service in Newport News Hampton, to help people get, I don't know if the buses came over here or not, or if it was just a bus service over there. And along the way, he accumulated upwards of 40 rental houses in Newport News. So he was a busy fella. He was a busy fella. Well, thank you.
That's one of those questions. You do a job.
There you go. Well, thank y'all so much. I appreciate it.